The Pirates just wrapped up a series with the Kansas City Royals, and it got me thinking, has the player development for the Pirates been good enough? We're going to discuss that in its entirety on today's episode of Locked On Pirates.
You are Locked On Pirates, your daily Pittsburgh Pirates podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And that is your team, your Pittsburgh Pirates, every single day, folks. Welcome back to the Locked On Pirates podcast on Monday, September 16th. My name is Ethan Smith, your host, who is always bringing you your news, analysis, opinions, and reactions to everything going on in the world of the Pittsburgh Pirates, from a lifelong fan to lifelong fans just like you. And as usual on Mondays, we do have Gary Morgan with us on Monday, September 16th. Which means that we only have about 2.5 weeks of baseball left. And then we have to wait until March to see this team play regular season baseball again, because they'll be opening against the Marlins again. So I'm sure that the expectations after another opening series against Miami will be through the roof, Gary, next season. But for starters, how are we doing following this series against Kansas City?
I mean, pretty good. I think Kansas City was definitely on a run when they got here. I'm not 100% sure what to make of them quite yet. Most of the AL Central teams have had the benefit of playing the White Sox all year, so
yeah,
they've kind of got a nice bank of extra wins in relation to the rest of the league. That said, there's no denying the Royals are a talented team, young. They've definitely built themselves into something, and it was fun to see some of the stars. Bobby Witt Jr., like you were just talking about, guy you haven't seen in a long time. I think he's really impressive, frightening as far as the way he can just hit anything on the ground to the left side, and it's potentially a base hit, which for him is a double or a triple. Yeah, they got some electricity there, man, for sure.
Yeah, and it's a team in the Royals that I was kind of just writing notes yesterday before I wanted to do this show with you. And it did dawn on me again, finally, that both of these teams are kind of in similar spots, because Kansas City and Pittsburgh have not been in the postseason since 2015. It's been a while for both of these teams, and you could consider that they've been rebuilding for most of that time. I mean, if we look at the Kansas City Royals, they were a 100-loss team last year, by a pretty immense margin, may I add. And they went out, and they obviously, Bobby Witt's development is a big reason why they're where they're at. But you look at the other things that they've done. Probably the steal of the century so far for a while has been getting Cole Reagans for Aroldis Chapman, because that kid is ridiculous. You then have veterans in Brady Singer and Seth Lugo. Well, Brady Singer, not so much a veteran, but Seth Lugo, who is also had a phenomenal season. And then you even look at outside of what they have of just Bobby Witt. You look at Michael Massey, Vinny Pasquantino, who they're hoping they get back from thumb injury, not surgery. And you look at all these things and you say, okay, it's a pretty good mixture of what they've done in the trade market, player development, and having a mixture of veteran talent, obviously with Salvador Perez, who I imagine would be a Hall of Famer someday. And the Pirates have to be looking at that team and saying, there's no reason that can't be us. But I think it has to start with player development internally, Gary. That's where I think you have to start with this. And I think Kansas City's done a pretty damn good job at doing it.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I would also say, like, you know, they went out and acquired pitching, and they brought in pitching in the free agent market. Michael Wacha and you know, Singer is another one that we talked about, and Cole Reagans, obviously the trade, and you know, I think Lugo is another guy that I think we wanted the Pirates to go after this offseason, right? But they have different problems than the Pirates had. They had some offense, they didn't have the pitching, and they went out and bought the pitching. Now it's up to the Pirates to go out and buy what they don't have. They have the pitching, they need to go buy the offense. So, I mean, if you really want to take the jump, at some point, it requires some purchases, man. I mean, like that's kind of what needs to happen.
Yeah, and we've seen the Pirates make some purchases over the last calendar year. Obviously, getting Aroldis Chapman in free agency, Rowdy Tellez in free agency. You look at Isaiah Kiner-Falefa and Brian De La Cruz in the trade market. You look at Jalen Beeks, a trade that, may I add, me and Gary went to the Altoona game on Friday, and we kind of talked about that Jalen Beeks trade, I think, a little too much that day, just because Luis Peralta is a guy that Gary absolutely loved, a guy that I thought could even be a contributor and would contribute right now. And it's kind of interesting because he's just not here anymore. But at the end of the day, you look at the acquisitions the Pirates have made, and none of them have been the splashy signing. You're not looking at anything that's really been balls to the wall, in your face. This is like a massive signing for this team. And with what they currently have, Gary, is where I think this gets very, it gets to the point where you're saying, okay, much like Kansas City, not to keep comparing the two, Paul Skeens is a generational guy. I think you could look at him as a generational player. You look at Bobby Witt, obviously a difference there with position player and pitcher. But when you get a player like this, and I think that might be what Kansas City's MO was, is okay, we got a guy here in Bobby Witt Jr. That's where I think those purchases have to start happening, because that window does not last forever for teams like Kansas City and Pittsburgh, where you have these guys. Now, obviously, they extended Bobby Witt for a very lengthy period of time, so he'll be there for a very long time. But everything else doesn't exactly gel all the time either. So is there any onus, you think, with having a guy in Paul Skeens now, where you were talking about eventually having to make those purchases to take the next step? Is that something we see from Pittsburgh this offseason? Hopefully, I guess is what I would be saying, because the clock is ticking every time Paul Skeens pitches, and he's pitching tonight too.
I mean, Eth, we don't even know who's going to be making those decisions. I mean, I can't even 100% tell you, like, GM's going to come back next year. So
yeah,
should it be next year? Yeah, it should. This year, I mean, you don't have to go along with me, but I give them a little bit of, hey, there's no way you could have possibly expected Paul Skeens to do what he's doing. It's that kind of historically ridiculous what he's doing, that I think that had you assumed this is what you were going to get, you're probably not a very good baseball executive. You know what I mean? And Jared Jones, I think, has looked relatively human. Like, if this is how if he had looked the way he has past his first month all year, that's all we've seen. Nobody is counting him in that 1-2 punch of excellent lockdown starters, because that's not what he's been. So, I mean, like, are they far along? Yeah. But did it sneak up on them a little bit? Yeah. Is there some evidence that it's maybe not 100% real past Paul Skeens? Yeah, maybe. Like, I think, like, they kind of got shocked that some of this pitching came along as quickly as it did. And that's ultimately on them too. That's still a mistake. But I just don't think it's the same mistake that a lot of people think.
Yeah, and I mean, Jared Jones obviously did something that we haven't really seen in a long time from a pitcher, where they just straight up win their job out of spring training. You don't see that too much here. And yeah, he's looked human. He just has, since the lat injury, and even before that, or a little bit before that, he was kind of showing some cracks in the armor, which I think is fine. I mean, he's in his rookie season, and I think that's one thing.
It's to be expected.
Yeah. And I think that's one thing a lot of people kind of just missed, is that when he had that first month where he was just electric, I think people just kind of forgot he was a rookie, and that he was going to have these rookie pains, and that he was going to eventually have to kind of be taken down a little bit, albeit the injury has kind of helped with that, I will say, because if he would have pitched for those 2 months, I don't know what his pitches or innings pitched would be at this point. And Paul Skeens, even, yes, he's having a ridiculously good season, but if you act like you haven't seen anything wrong with what Paul Skeens has done, there's been times where Paul Skeens gets himself into trouble. The command gets a little off. The pitches aren't going where he wants them to, but he's just good enough to where he can get out of it, and it doesn't really affect his stat line all that much. But again, these are decisions that even you mentioned. We kind of have to get over the first hurdle of who's going to be making them first. And then when they do eventually make that hurdle, then you can start thinking about these things. But eventually, I do think just as from a fan perspective, you do get a little frustrated just because you're saying, okay, well, now we have this, this, and this. We know we need this, this, and this. So go fill this, this, and this. It's like, let's go ahead and just fill that in. Now, obviously, there's a lot of factors that come into play there with that, but it's pretty nice to have pretty clear needs on your team. And I think the Pirates have those right now. But
it is, and they're clearer needs for sure than they were last offseason. Last offseason, I think starting pitching was number 1, 2, and 3 on almost everybody's list. And then, we need a first baseman. We need a right fielder. Yep. But and a catcher. We talked about all those things, but Ethan, there's a different mix of things now, and they're a little bit more cemented. Like, I'd be shocked if they felt they had to go get a starting pitcher, but they might. Their additions, they're pretty defined right now. And even some of those they're messing with. Like, it was center fielder, first base. Well, it ain't center fielder anymore. And I just read something today that they're seriously considering moving Brian Reynolds over to first base. So might not be that either.
Interesting. That'll be a topic probably on my show later this week. I'll have to find that and read that because I did not see that yet.
Kevin Gorman, the Trib today, so check it out.
Well, there you go. Shout out to Kevin for that story because I'm going to probably be reading it right after this show is done. But a big part of this, too, I think, is the development of this team internally. I think that's a big part of this team, a big part of what they need to do moving forward. And me and Gary are going to discuss how they've built this team internally on today's episode of Locked On Pirates. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make sure you go to FanDuel.com right now for all of your sports betting needs because there's a lot of stuff to bet on right now if that is what suits your fancy. And you've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sports book, but we have something a little different for you. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. Just visit FanDuel.com right now and download America's #1 sportsbook. Make sure you bet on the Pirates and Paul Skeens tonight against the Cardinals because I think it's a lock on FanDuel.com. And after making this your first listen of the day every single Monday, make sure you check out Locked On MLB with Paul Francis Sullivan, who is getting you ramped up for the MLB postseason. A postseason that I have absolutely no clue who's going to win because there's just a lot of going on as far as the MLB postseason is concerned. But make sure you check out Locked On MLB on the Locked On Podcast Network, where it is your team every day. So I think a large topic of conversation, Gary, that we've had this year, just among Pirate fans in general, has kind of just been the development of this team internally. Paul Skeens, I kind of removed from that a little bit just because of where he stands and what kind of player he is. Now, obviously, we didn't expect him to be this good. And if I'm being honest, I didn't even expect him to be up that early in early May. I was expecting June or July at the soonest. He's just been ridiculous. Jared Jones, I think you consider that a win right now as far as internal player development. I think he's been serviceable enough with the full sample size, and he's been good enough to be in the rotation for the future. And I think he's only going to get better. I'm going to throw another name out there that a lot of people have just seemingly not talked about all that much. Luis Ortiz has just done a complete 180 of his 2023 campaign that wasn't as bad as a lot of people were throwing out there. but the velocity issues were major for him last season. He comes into this year expecting just to pretty much be a reliever, gets thrust into a starting role, and he's been good ever since. Nick Gonzalez, kind of like what I've seen from him this year too. The numbers aren't exactly flashy, but a lot better than what they were last year. After that is where I have trouble, because after that, Gary, I start looking around and I wonder, okay, what's going on with Jack Sawinski? What's going on with Henry Davis? Even Key Brian Hayes, I think his is more just injury related than it is anything at this point. But after you drop from Skeens, Jones, Ortiz, and Gonzalez, it becomes increasingly difficult to feel good about what has developed internally here. And I'm not, now this is timeout before anybody starts throwing comments at me that I'm just saying these guys suck and they're never going to be good. I'm not saying that they're not going to ever be good. It's just at this point, it seems like it's going to take a little bit longer than some of us may have expected with guys like Jack Sawinski and Henry Davis. So where do you sit on all this, Gary? Because I think the internal player development is really where this team needs to see something in 2025.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. But I think a lot of internal development has to take place at the major league level.
Yes.
And that requires watching some guys who aren't fully cooked look like they're cooked, man. Like, you know, you have to deal with some of that in order to get through it and into the part where you get to benefit from their talents. We were just at this minor league game, Ethan, and I think one of my big takeaways from it, we might have heard 3 or 4 balls hit that sounded like major league contact in that entire game, right? Like Termar Johnson went, what, 3 for 5?
It was like 3 for 3 with
3 for 3 with a couple walks, right? He hit one ball that I think might have been a hit in the majors, and that's it. That whole night, you know. So like you look at the box score for these kids, and you think to yourself, well, yeah, they're going to come up here and do that, of course, but they're not playing the same game. They're not facing the same pitchers. They're not facing the same fielders. Like I could tell you, both of Termar Johnson's singles through the right side of that infield would have been taken down in the major leagues, big time, easily. So there's an awful lot of baseball that I think we just assume is there. Another side to this is when you're developing your team internally and you don't put anything in the majors to stop it, you force them up here probably earlier than you really want to. And they come up here and they have learning to do. They have things they have to work on. They have things you're going to have to coach them up on. They have things they've never seen before. And you've got to deal with it. You have no option. Teams like LA and New York and whatnot, they can have guys that are considered freaks by everyone else sitting there in AAA because they don't have room for them, which means they get more time to develop. So when they come up, they look like what? More developed.
Yep.
And they look like their development system is so far above everyone else. But in reality, they've taken 4 years to develop somebody that would have been forced up in 2 somewhere else. So I don't know, man. I kind of think that we overblow it a little bit. That said, the team themselves find a problem with it. They're the ones firing some of their development system, not me. So they must see an issue.
Yeah, and you look at a lot of where this team sits too. And I mean, before the season started, we were talking about Henry Davis showing some improvements. We were talking about Jack Sawinski being a potential 30 home run guy. And that goes back to where I say a lot of, player development just kind of happens naturally. I think we lose sight of that too, is, Gary will tell me all the time, don't look at ETAs on MLB prospects because they don't matter. And he's not wrong. They don't matter at all. Every player develops differently. And for the Pirates, I mean, I think you genuinely have 2 guys now, not just one, but 2 that you can look at and say, okay, development is not a linear line. Sometimes it's going to go way up. Sometimes it's going to go way down. Sometimes it's going to go like the roller coaster in Altuna's right field. That's just how it is. Joey Bart and Mitch Keller, I think, are the two people that whenever you want to talk about development, look at those guys. Mitch Keller was the worst starting pitcher in Major League Baseball in 2021 and prior. Joey Bart was a number 2 overall selection that just ended up being in the shadow of Buster Posey and just needed apparently to go somewhere else and figure it out. So albeit, like I said at the beginning of this segment, albeit that I'm mentioning Jack Sawinski and Henry Davis as failures in development right now, that doesn't mean they're going to be failures in development 2 years from now. That doesn't even mean they could be. I mean, you could see Jack Sawinski come back next year and hit those 30 home runs. We expected to see him hit this year. And even let's go back to 2022. Who expected Luis Ortiz to do what he did that year and cement himself in the rotation?
Yeah, who
Rowanzi Contreras in 2022 was a win in player development and then fell off the face of the earth in 2023.
Yeah, and who expected Nick Gonzalez to get over his strikeout issues the way he did? You know, like they were awful, and I think most of us wrote him off. Most of us are writing off Leo Verpagero right now. Most of us wrote off Termar Johnson because he was hitting under 200 in the minor leagues. Most of us have written off Lonnie White because he strikes out a ton and can't do anything else right now, right? I think there's an awful lot of that, and a lot of it is, well, you know, most guys aren't going to make it. That's a reality that we never, ever want to face. But the truth is, most guys aren't going to make it. And on some teams, again, teams like the Dodgers and whatnot, and even some of the mid-tiers, you don't even hear this story because they only need 1 or 2 of them to make it every year. And 1 or 2 of them usually do because they're 25 or 26 and ready for their debut. You know, like it's just a different situation entirely. And I just think it kind of skews everything that you think about when you watch the team. Development wise this year with Henry, defensively, he's probably their best catcher in their system right now. That's development. You can say the bat didn't come along, and it didn't. But defense absolutely has. He has proven that he can catch.
But Gary, I was told he can't catch. Like I was told he physically cannot catch behind the plate at all. Like,
well, then hell, they did an even better job of development than I'm selling. Because he has turned into their best defensive catcher, including Bart, including, you know, Grandal. But, I mean, Grandal, it's not his fault because he's got all those mummy wrappings all over him. But, you know.
Yeah, well, you know, we got to throw some Grandal jokes out there since we're only going to have them for another 2.5 weeks. But it did get me thinking, Gary, that when we were at that Altoona game, prospects are always fun to talk about. So which prospects are next in line for the Pittsburgh Pirates? We're going to end today's show with that. Today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB and get $50 instantly when you bet $5 because last night the Texans and the Bears played, and if you would have just put Caleb Williams on there, one Caleb Williams passing yard gets you 1 win on Prize Picks every single week in September. That's right. Only 1 yard gets you an automatic win every football weekend in September. That's 4 weeks of free W's. So don't miss this deal on Prize Picks because it's gone when September ends. If you want to play Prize Picks alongside celebrities like Drewski, Joe Budden, and MMA champ Sugar Sean O'Malley, you can find community plays under the promos tab on the app to view entries from some of the biggest names in the Prize Picks community each week. And also don't forget that Prize Picks has invented the flex play, which means you can still cash out if your lineup isn't perfect. You can double your money even if one of your picks doesn't hit. So download the Prize Picks app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB and get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code LOCKEDONMLB on Prize Picks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. Prize Picks, run your game. And folks, don't forget that if you were on the go for this Pirates Cardinals series, you can listen to the Pirates on Sirius XM. Just type in Pirates in the search tab and you'll be able to find everything you need as far as Pirates baseball over the next couple of weeks, because it will be over in the next couple of weeks. My 4th season of covering this team will be over. It appears that they'll have the best record they've had in that time. No joke, Gary, have had people blame me for the fact that they're not winning because they haven't won since I started this show. And then I asked them what happened the previous 4 years before I started covering this show. And prospects are usually the talk, aren't they? I have to be careful with my words here. I don't want to get copyright stricken when I say Pirates prospects. But anyways, the Pirates next season, I think you're going to kind of start seeing another group of prospects make their way here to Pittsburgh. Now, a lot of people are obviously going to point at the top guys like Bubba Chandler and Thomas Harrington and Braxton Ashcraft and Termar Johnson and those guys. But Gary, who do we think is next in line for the Pirates? Is it those top guys, or are we kind of maybe going down the list a little bit and seeing if there's anything else available as well?
I think Nick York is a near certainty at this point. I don't know what they're going to do with them yet, but I definitely think he can debut this year. He's probably the only offensive player, besides maybe Leo Verpagero making a return engagement, that I could see this year offensively. I think those two. Pitching, you nailed them all already. Ashcraft's not going to happen this year for sure. I don't see the other two happening this year either, personally. If only because they don't need 40-man spots, and that would be kind of stupid right now to do that. But Nick York does. I expect that to happen before the season ends. I also expect them to let him finish out his Indianapolis season, if only because I think we kind of forget that he just got called up to AAA this year. So, I mean, and really his call up to AAA was more making room for another prospect within Boston's system to move up to AA. It was a demotion by promotion, if you will.
Yeah.
And then he just caught fire in AAA and just started going off. So I don't think the Red Sox expected it. I don't necessarily think the Pirates expected it to continue the way it has. And they really don't know what they're doing with him yet. They're starting to stick him at shortstop now. I think they've run him over there 5 or 6 games now. He's still playing outfield. He could play some first base. I mean, they don't know what they're doing with Nick York yet. So I don't know. But he should get added to the 40-man. He's the guy I expect to see this year. As far as pitchers go, man, Mike Burrows would be another one, but he's really, really struggled. So I think you might see them just push that into the spring.
Yeah, and I mean, you mentioned Ashcraft. I think he's a guy you could potentially see next year. The only difference, or the only question I think you're really asking with him at this point is if he's going to be a starter or reliever. I've started to lean more bullpen with him, which I don't think is an issue. I mean, you have other guys that I think can start in this league that I'm very confident in Bubba Chandler and Thomas Harrington. And then that's not even mentioning the guy we watched pitch Friday, and Anthony Solometto, who has also struggled this year. Very interesting player, by the way, when you see it live. Just how he throws. I think you mentioned that it looked like he was going to like throw his shoulder out of place every time he threw a pitch because of just how he throws. But if it works for him, it works for him. One guy
we were watching it from a side angle too, which was extra weird. Yeah.
Yeah. And one guy you mentioned too that I think is going to be an interesting watch next year is Jack Brannigan. I mean, truthfully, I think this is a kid that defensively has it, can play shortstop, can play third base. Obviously still at the lower levels right now. He's still in Greensboro, but I think you'll see that jump finally happen next year a little bit. Not saying that he's going to debut, but he's definitely a candidate to watch if he catches fire enough. And then Sung-Chae Shang, probably the best defensive shortstop they have in the system right now. Just a guy you hope can hit a little bit more. He hasn't hit as much as he did previously. The home runs are still there a little bit, but just still kind of coming along in the hitting department. But defensively, as a shortstop, it's another guy I think you watch. So they still have a lot of intriguing players. But I do think, again, you hesitate to just kind of pen these guys in right away just from what we've seen from guys like Henry Davis and Jack Sawinski, because at the end of the day, of this top 10 that they currently have, if 3 of them work, I think you consider that a win. I mean, truthfully.
I think that we as fans, it's time to start changing our thought process a little bit. It's not about when guys get here as much as like now you want the team to make it hard for them to get here.
Yep.
Like you don't leave a spot open for Nick York. You don't leave a spot open for Bubba Chandler. You don't leave a spot open for anybody. Andy Rodriguez. You don't leave a spot open for Andy Rodriguez and count on him to be filling in a starting role for you right away. You leave a path for him to win it or to get himself back into it, but like if you really want them to take a step, you have to stop thinking of the prospects as deserving a shot. You have to think of them as earning a shot. Like the whole Termar discussion that we just had. Yeah, he could debut next year at some point. I think the timing of that will probably work out. I think he'll make his way to AAA at some point next year. I really do. And once you're there, once you're in AA, it really could happen at any point. But he will not need it added to the 40-man next year, so he's going to have to make his own case. That's going to take a lot of work, Ethan. I don't see it. And then going into 2026, it shouldn't be like it's Termar's time. No, that's not how it works. That's just not how it should work anymore. That's how it worked in 2020. It's not how it should work in 2025.
Yeah, and it's an interesting thing to keep watching because I think that is the best way to do it. Let the guys, let the players, let the prospects prove to you that they deserve to be up here. And a lot of them can do it. I mean, you could see it happen next year. And that's what we're saying here. We're not saying that it can't happen, but we're also not saying just hand them the spot like it's a free like sample at Costco. Like it's not that anymore. Like that's where we need to get past. And I think that's a great spot to end this show today here on Locked On Pirates. Folks, don't forget, follow me on Twitter at MVP_Ethan or at Locked On Pirates. I'm over there all the time. Follow Gary at GaryMo2007. Also, he'll yeah, that was a word. His 5 thoughts at 5 will be dropping at usually 5, but sometimes a little bit earlier. Any plans for the fan forum this week that people should know about?
Yeah, Jim and I started our little project last week of Andrew McCutchen potentially being a Hall of Fame candidate. So we laid out some evidence last week. We're going to hopefully solicit some pretty good information from you guys. We put out a nice poll, got some good stuff already. We're going to research it some more, and we're going to make our case. Isn't he a Hall of Famer? Is there anything he can do in the next year or two to get there?
Yeah, well, winning a World Series would help. I'd say that, but we'll see if that happens. And that'd be great, but I think that's a great conversation point. Guys, find this show, by the way, on YouTube and all of your audio platforms. It's free and available to you, so there's no reason for you not to tune in. We're also 1 subscriber away from 2,100 here on YouTube, so make sure you hit that subscribe button. Have a wonderful rest of your Monday, and until tomorrow, we'll see you on the flip side.